welcome back to my channel. Welcome also back to Vlogtober. I definitely put also in the wrong place. Also, welcome back to Vlogtober. Welcome to my channel if you're just joining me. Basically, if you didn't already know, Vlogtober is something which I'm doing throughout October. So it's basically just an upload every day in October. So it's like vlog, October, Vlogtober. I feel like the lighting is very strange depending on... I'll just remain here. So as you will have already seen from the title of this video, this is going to be a video all about PGCE evidence folders and maybe primary education as well. I guess it applies, it's still the evidence folder, but obviously mine is specific to high school, in particular MFL, but really it doesn't matter what subject you're doing, it's all the same. And this isn't my only folder, I've got another one here. And oh gosh, this is going to get a bit, oh my god, this is the biggest one here. I've got another one here. Can I put it on top? Oh my gosh, yes. And then I've got one here. Is that all of them? Yeah. That was a bit dangerous. I am aware that this video isn't going to appeal to everybody, apply to everybody. So I mean, you might just want to watch it to just have an idea about it, but I feel as though most people who watch this will be people who are actually studying, teaching, training to be teachers, and who actually are in the process of doing their evidence folder. So in a minute, I am actually going to go through and show you intricate details of my folder, explain how it's all set out, but I just wanted to do an introduction first to just introduce you to the video. So this is obviously just how I set my folder out. If I did it again, I would definitely arrange it differently, and I would definitely recommend arranging your evidence folders into standards. So obviously there are 8 standards, I've forgotten now. There are 8 standards, so I would recommend dividing your folder or folders up into 8 standards, maybe 2 folders with like 4 standards in each would be a good option, I think, now looking back. But I actually arranged mine, well, I've got this here. This is the main bulk of my evidence folder. And at the front, you can see how I've arranged it. Like that. And then throughout I just had, let me find a piece here, I just had like a post-it note, and then I wrote which standards it appealed to. So this specific piece of evidence applied to standard 1B and standard 2E. I set goals that challenge and generate high levels of enthusiasm, participation and commitment to learning in all pupils. That's standard 1B. And standard 2E, pupils are strongly motivated to meet high and consistently challenging expectations for responsible and conscientious attitude to work and study. In my first section, I've got weekly reviews of progress. Yeah, so at the back of that, I've literally got like a table where I write like where I meet standard 2, standard 3 and any other standards that I want to address. And then in my next section, I've got lesson observations. So these are from my mentor, and these I would say are very, very vital pieces of evidence. I would recommend getting your subject mentor or your professional mentor to observe you at least once a week. Obviously they're going to observe you during every lesson because you can't just be left on your own to teach, but I would recommend that they did an official lesson observation form for you at least once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week, maybe when it gets towards the end of placement, twice a week, because obviously that's when you're going to be most improved. So with these, the different universities do them differently, and like I said, I will go through this in detail more so in a minute, but I'm just giving you a brief overview. Oh, and By the way, I should probably mention now that I actually got outstanding in my overall teaching. So this evidence folder is graded outstanding, so that's the best you can get. So if I do say so myself, it is good advice, because obviously it's the best that you can get, just saying. The way how our university did it is they have each standard, and then they encourage the teacher to mark beginning, developing, good or outstanding, and then the teacher just writes like a little comment in each box and then grades it. So this is from one of my beginning ones. Oh no, yeah, it's not towards the end, because here I'm good, developing, good, developing good, and then on top of those standards which are already highlighted, I again did the post-it note and just like highlighted some other standards which it's also applied to. So for instance, with this one I said standard 8B, I effectively consult with different colleagues as appropriate, knowing when to draw on their help and advice. Standard 4D, I'm critically reflective in systematically evaluating my own practice, judging its impact on all groups of learners. So for that standard, you can use anything that's a lesson evaluation that you've done yourself. You could maybe write a note if your teacher has given you some feedback, like my lesson observation here. You could maybe analyse it and say, in the future, I will do this, and then that counts as standard 4D. I just put like that applies to all lesson observations. So then I've just got all of my lesson observations in this section. I'm just like quickly going through. And then again here I've got my post-it notes. So these are all lesson observations. Make sure that you just get a lot of good ones. And then these are some more pieces of feedback that were sent by email. So even if they're not done on the official lesson observation sheet, you can still use them as evidence. If your teacher ever gives you any feedback, even if it's verbal, which it probably will be most of the time, you do get feedback verbally as well as written down on an official form. So either you could ask your mentor or whoever's giving you the feedback to write it down in an email just so that you have it as evidence and you can refer back to, or you could write it down yourself, but I'd recommend to do it quite quickly, otherwise you're going to forget, and then you can use that as evidence. Whoa. So my teachers actually gave it me through email a lot of the time, so I've used that as evidence. As you can see, I've just used my post-it notes. I've even got some handwritten ones over here. These are handwritten feedback from some teachers. And then moving to my next section, what's this? These are my lesson plans, and like I've shown you, I've done the post-it note and just showed how each standard is referenced in my lesson plans. So on my lesson plan, I've got the learning objective, learning outcomes, assessment opportunities. I've got the minute-by-minute breakdown of the lesson, as well as the evaluation of teaching and learning objectives, etc. And at least 3 teachers' standards to be evidenced during the lesson. We do that there, and then I've got my post-it note. So I've done that for every single lesson that I have ever taught, but obviously I didn't put them all in. You just want the ones with the best evidence. So that's all my lesson plans. And moving on to my next section, these are more lesson plans because I've got a lot of them, a lot of opportunities for evidence, and more lesson plans. The majority of this is lesson plans. Then the next section, this is for assessment. So for instance, for assessment, if you use Kahoot, then you can actually download the students' scores, and then if you download them and then print them off, that's a good way of getting evidence. It shows people's overall performance and like percentage of correct answers, incorrect answers, and just gives you like a lot of different data, which can be standard 6C. Standard 6C, I use a range of relevant data to monitor pupil progress and set targets. Lesson planning is informed by how well pupils meet targets. So obviously doing this gives evidence of using a range of data, but then also you'd maybe have to write a note. So based on this information, next lesson I will recap and then an area which, for example, students didn't do well in, just to show how it's going to be used to inform future lessons. I've got a few of these from Kahoot, and then okay, so I did a year 10 mentoring program, and I took the documents from that and used that as different evidence, standard 1, 2, 3 and 8. And then I've got the record program. I've got information on safeguarding and the welcome sheets I was given when I joined the school, and some training days. And then I've actually got the students' registers, and that's got all of their personal information, which obviously I can't show. But that can be used as evidence. You just have to make it anonymous, so just like blank out the students' names. But it just shows that you're using that to inform how you plan lessons, and you're taking into account students, for example, if they have any learning difficulties, or if they're, for example, I had a student who was bilingual. He's actually, his first language was Spanish. He was in my class, so it was obviously good to know that before the lesson, because then I can adapt the lesson for him from the first lesson, rather than only finding out in the first lesson and then having to wait till the second one. The behaviour policy, you can use that for standard 8. I used it for standard 8B and standard 7B. And then I just got like a map of the school and some documents that I was given at the start. And then I've got evidence of the students' work. I've actually got evidence of a student's assessment, and I use that for standard 6A for assessment, and also you can evidence the feedback that you give to them. You can use that as evidence. And then in terms of recording data, I've written that down. So they're marks from the assessments. Parents' evening and inset day, whatever you do, try to get some sort of like documentation which can act as evidence. Otherwise you can write it down, say I attended this inset day, and then give the date, and then get somebody to sign it. Let's say signed by head of blah blah blah. Parents' evening, I've just got my parents' evening booklet and my name tag. And then I actually got student feedback. I used to love doing that. For example, if I'd done a lesson which I thought was really good, or just sometimes I used to do it, I used to ask students to give their feedback. So I got them to write it down on a post-it note, and then I used that as evidence. And yeah, that just spans over the next few pages. Here, there are a few things, especially for standard 8, that it's hard to get hard evidence for. So examples of these are break duty, form, working in your form, meetings, going to staff meetings, departmental meetings, year group meetings, and weekly teach meets, or like, I don't know, you call them different things. Sports afternoon, Monday morning greetings, assemblies, and lunchtime duty. So I just wrote them down and said, I have done break time duty, I have worked with year 8 form. Then I got my mentor to sign them to confirm it. And then again, I just did a little post-it note to document which standards that applies to. I actually took pictures of the whiteboard at the end of the lesson. So that was when we were in an ICT classroom. So I wrote down on the board all of the websites that we used, and I told, like, basically how I used to do those lessons was I would tell the students you can go on this website or this website, and then after like the first 20 minutes you can then go on to this one which has got a game or whatever. And so basically I wrote all the websites on the board, and then I took a picture of it, and then I said it was standard 1B. I set goals that challenge and generate high levels of enthusiasm for participation in and commitment to learning in all pupils. Standard 2B, I have a thorough and detailed understanding of pupils' capabilities and prior learning based upon systematic systematic use of focused assessment. And standard 2E, pupils are strongly motivated to meet high and consistently challenging expectations for responsible and conscientious attitude to work and study. Okay, then we used to show my homework at my school, so I just did screenshots of when I set homework, not for every homework that I set, obviously, but you know, just for evidencing for my folder. I've just done some different screenshots of different homework that I set, the information, and yeah, used that as evidence. And then I actually screenshotted emails that I'd sent to different members of staff to show good communication. I used it for standard 8B. I effectively consult with different colleagues as appropriate, knowing when to draw on their help and advice. And then just different emails. For example, once a student was badly behaved and I gave him a C4, which is a bad behaviour consequence, and I had to email the head of MFL about that. So I screenshotted the email and could use that as behaviour is implemented consistently in accordance with school's behaviour policy standard 7A. I'm proactive and make a significant contribution to the wider life and ethos of the school. I have a clear understanding of teachers' legal responsibilities standard 8A. Yeah, I will go through all of this in detail, standard by standard, in a minute, but I just, like I said, wanted to give you an overview, which has kind of taken a while. And then at our school, we used to log the behaviour online. So again, did a screenshot of that. Screenshot of my emails, because I had my own school email address. And then I've got some evidence of the work that we used. So we did a crepe lesson once where we made crepes. So I've got the recipe, and then I've got some other worksheets that I've got here showing how I've used differentiation, etc, etc. Plan and teach well-structured lessons standard 4. And then then we had to just do a subject knowledge enrichment as well. Oh, and then here I've got my professional mentor who gave me a very nice positive comment. So now I am going to go through all of my folders specifically. I'm going to go through each standard. So I'm going to say standard 1, I'm going to go through what it is and then show you evidence, examples of evidence that I used in my folder, etc, etc. Yeah, and I'll just show you all what I've done. So yeah. Right, so here's my main folder. I labelled it out like this with each section, and this was just everything that I based it off. So this is the standards table. I printed it out. So I printed out my standards table and I actually highlighted which standard I thought that I was at the end. So I actually did this with my professional mentor, so she agreed. I highlighted each section, so as you can see it goes from beginning, developing, good and outstanding. So I've gone for outstanding in pretty much all of them. You can see here it's got standard 1, set high expectations which inspire, motivate and challenge pupils. You've got standard 1A, B, C. Oh yeah, that's all it goes up to for this one. Yeah, just all A, B, C. So I did that for all of my standards, just highlighted where I thought I was up to. So I'm going to show you some examples of evidence which I've got for standard 1. So 1A, B and C. So standard 1A is to establish a safe and stimulating environment for pupils rooted in mutual respect. And to get outstanding, you have to, it says, uses innovative and creative approaches to establish a safe and stimulating environment that sustains pupils' interest in learning. So I would recommend to evidence something such as a time where you have used the behaviour policy in the school. You could actually print out the school's behaviour policy and use that as part of your evidence. And then also maybe a lesson evaluation where you have imposed one of the behaviour consequences or a positive behaviour point. Highly respected, which allows a wide range of approaches to learning and classroom organisation. So again, that ties in with the behaviour, and able to demonstrate innovative and creative strategies to set up and maintain a purposeful, safe learning environment. So maybe different ways how you have sustained positive behaviour. So standard 1B is to set goals that stretch and challenge pupils of all backgrounds, abilities and dispositions. And for outstanding, you need to set goals that challenge and generate high levels of enthusiasm for participation in and commitment to learning in all pupils. You can use the learning objective as one piece of evidence. So just a learning objective that challenges and generates high levels of enthusiasm. So for example, you could do a challenge, for example, like the chili challenge, where it gets progressively more difficult. Standard 1C, to demonstrate consistently the positive attitudes, values and behaviours which are expected of pupils. So outstanding is to always effectively demonstrates the positive attitudes, values and behaviour expected of all pupils, and these show a positive impact on the conduct and behaviour of all pupils. So you could evidence, for example, a lesson evaluation where students have behaved well, and also get your professional mentor to maybe confirm that you demonstrate those positive attributes. So I'm going to show you some examples now. Okay, so here's an example of standard 1. So you can see that my mentor has given me a comment there, and then she circled G for good. So that's for standard 1, A, B and C. So that's a piece of evidence for good. Here's another piece of evidence that can be used for good. So yeah, you can continue to just use any lesson evaluations. And then as I continue on, my evaluations get better, and you can see that this one is O for outstanding. Yeah, and it's just a comment from my mentor in regard to the lesson. You can pause and read the comment if you like. And yeah, she circled outstanding, so that's a great example of a piece of evidence. Here's another very simple piece of evidence for standard 1. It says you told the students that you expected them all to get at least an R1 today. An R1 is a positive behaviour point, and she circled O for outstanding. Again, here's some more evidence for standard 1. A lot of it is also based on when your uni mentor comes in and does a lesson observation. So this is one of the lesson observations that my uni mentor did, and she also gave me outstanding for standard 1, A, B and C, and her comment is written there, and then she circled outstanding. Okay, so moving on to standard 2. So standard 2 is to promote good progress and outcomes by pupils. Standard 2A, to be accountable for pupils' attainment, progress and outcomes. And on standard 2, I actually highlighted some outstanding and some good. I mean, there's standard 2A, B, C, D and E for standard 2. So I'll show you some examples of standard 2. In regard to standard 2A, to be accountable for pupils' attainment, progress and outcomes, I reckon that, well, it says here, systematic, in-depth evaluation of the impact of teaching. Great evidence of that would be just your lesson evaluations after each lesson, and how it can be adapted to promote the best attainment, progress and outcomes. So it says fully understand and is able to model school policy and practice. So maybe have evidence of the school's policies, and then evidence of whenever you have used it. And then evidence of how progression has been sustained and secured. So either a table of students' results, you could use Kahoot to show how progress has been made. Plan teaching to build on pupils' capabilities and prior knowledge. So it says here plans are differentiated and personalised. So when you do your lesson plans, you could take that into account and make a note of specific ways that you have differentiated for each student if necessary. Standard 2C, guide pupils to reflect on the progress they have made and their emerging needs. You could maybe leave 5 minutes at the end of the lesson to allow students to write down how they think that they have progressed during that lesson, and if there's anything that they would like to recap. Also, you could do assessment for learning. So throughout the lesson, if you're doing a task, ask students to raise their hands if they're very confident, if they're okay or if they're not confident, and that will give you a good indication, and then you can write that in your lesson plan and use that as evidence. Standard 2D, demonstrate knowledge and understanding of how pupils learn and how this impacts on teaching. So again, lesson evaluations. Yeah, I would suggest lesson evaluations for standard 2D. Standard 2E, encourage pupils to take a responsible and conscientious attitude to their own work and study. So through setting homework, yeah, I'd say through setting homework and learning objectives. Right, now I'll show you some evidence of standard 2. Of course, lesson observations, like I showed in the last one. So here I've got outstanding. Right, this is what she said. The students made excellent progress against outcomes. The planning considered all the activities needed to fulfill the outcome, and there was a very sound focus on challenge. There were ample opportunities for productive use of the language. You maintained high expectations to ensure pupils made progress. Books were marked up to date with next step advice given. Here's another piece of evidence. Use of Kahoot to promote competition and maintain engagement and a fast pace to the start of the lesson. Good use of verbal praise and the RDFL system to promote engagement and progress. And that's outstanding. So here's an example of one of my evaluations of teaching, which is attached to one of my lesson plans. So I have just done a commentary on the lesson where I've just reflected on the lesson and how I've actually done here commentary moving forward and said what I would do next lesson. And I have evidenced this as standard 2E. I said pupils are strongly motivated to meet high and consistently challenging expectations for responsible and conscientious attitude to work and study. Here I have recorded 2 individual students' commentaries. So I've said that I think both students lacked motivation, they were easily distracted and didn't contribute to the lesson. So then I've actually said here, standard 3, so a standard to be evidenced during the lesson, encourage students to ask questions and encourage involvement and reward positive behaviour. So the second one there is for standard 2. And then I've also referenced standard 2 over here. I said standard 2C. 2C, I identify the personal progress and learning needs of each pupil, which is referenced above. And standard 2D, I have detailed knowledge and understanding of how pupils learn and how to overcome potential barriers to learning. Standard 3 is to demonstrate good subject and curriculum knowledge. Standard 3A, to have a secure knowledge of the relevant subject and curriculum areas, foster and maintain pupils' interest in the subject and address misunderstandings. So again, this can be from lesson observations. Standard B, demonstrate a critical understanding of developments in the subject and curriculum areas and promote value of scholarship. So I've managed to find an example for standard 3. So this is actually just an evaluation of one of my lessons, and I reference standard 3A. I'm highly confident and have a competent level of subject knowledge related to MFL and the wider curriculum. I'm able to foster, maintain increasing pupil interest in MFL by delivering engaging teaching episodes, ensuring progression is made by all students and addressing misunderstandings. I've also used an email which a teacher wrote me as lesson feedback, and I've referenced that as standard 3 as well. So this is the lesson evaluation made by my university mentor. So she has written, good target language. Do you need to repeat in English? You use pupils sometimes pursue this. You use pupils. I don't know what that says. Language well something and building on prior language, confidence, delivery of language plus grammar. Don't really know what she's on about, but she gave me outstanding. And again here by my subject mentor, she said you had obviously researched this topic very well and picked a topic, music and social media, that is very current. Outstanding. Painting. Standard 3, secure knowledge of materials known. You will need to improve use of target language. It was good at the start, but something waned throughout the lesson. Outstanding. That's just a good, but still pretty good. Outstanding. Improved use of target language in classroom, all classroom instructions, and a lot of your teaching talk now being done in Spanish. Outstanding. Outstanding. Standard 4, plan and teach well-structured lessons. This is just an easy one. Just evidence your lesson plans and your lesson evaluations, and of course your lesson feedback. So learning is evident through well-paced activities, so you can show that through the minute-by-minute steps of your lesson plan. Consistently support all learners to develop, enhance and apply new knowledge. So ways how you've differentiated. Takes risks when making learning interesting. So anytime that you've done something unusual in the classroom, so for example I did a lesson where we made pancakes. I'll show you some examples. I mean, I don't just want to go through all of the substandards because you could just do that yourself. So I'll show you examples. So like I said, a lot of my standard 4 is evidenced through lesson plans, which I think is the best way because it's all about planning and structuring lessons. There's some more standard 4 here. Standard 4A, learning is evident through well-paced activities, and then I literally have my activities step by step evidenced. So some more evidence for standard 4. This is my evaluation of teaching. So I've done the commentary on the lesson and commentary moving forward, and I've referenced standard 4B and D. So I always support all learners to develop and enhance and apply knowledge in a range of circumstances and situations, and I critically reflect and evaluate my own practice and judge its impact on learners to inform future planning. Standard 5, adapt teaching to respond to the strengths and needs of all pupils. If you have a lesson which you teach to different levels, then that would be great to show how you adapt it to each one. So that's standard 5. Let me look. Standard 5. So here is an example on one of my lesson observation forms. She's given me outstanding. She said the level of challenge was appropriate to this top set with good questioning and grammar throughout the lesson. So I actually had top set and bottom set year 8 Spanish. So my mentor could see the difference of how I adapted those lessons to suit the student's standard, and also individually within the class as well, how I incorporated differentiation, which can be shown in lesson plans and evaluations. So here I've done an evaluation of my teaching like I've showed you before, and I've referenced standard 5D because I said I have an excellent understanding of the diverse needs of all learners, and I am able to adapt teaching effectively and evaluate it to meet the diverse needs of all learners. Here I have evaluated one individual student, and I've referenced standard 5A. I said lessons are based on consideration of individual learning needs, and I employ differentiation strategies that address learners' needs and thus remove barriers to learning. And then I've referenced standard 5B and C. I accommodate individual differences between pupils, and I understand factors that inhibit people's ability to learn. I also have an excellent awareness of how physical, social and intellectual development can influence pupil outcomes. Standard 6 is to make accurate and productive use of assessment. So I reckon just use lots of Kahoot, give an example of an assessment which you've used, give examples of assessment for learning. You can put them in through lesson plans, lesson evaluations, lesson observations, students' marks, and also feedback that you've given. So if you've written on somebody's assessment, take a picture of that for evidence. So here I have done my lesson plan, and I've referenced standard 6A. I said I draw on excellent subject knowledge to plan and set challenging tasks based on accurate assessment of learners' prior skills. Assessment is carried out effectively. So I have planned this lesson based on previous assessment of the lesson. So that's given me an idea of where students are up to, and then I can plan the lesson based on that. So here is an example of the Kahoot printed out assessment information. So I've referenced standard 6C. I use a range of relevant data to monitor pupil progress and set targets. Lesson planning is informed by how well pupils meet targets. Standard 7, manage behaviour effectively to ensure a good and safe learning environment. So I recommend basically the behaviour policy with annotations and notes on any evidence of when you have carried out the behaviour policy. So for example, if you have written names on the board for positive or negative reasons, take a picture, use that as evidence. If you've logged it online, for example, a lot of schools use Progresso, take a screenshot, use it as evidence. What else? High expectations. So for example, like we saw before, my teacher said, you said at the beginning of the lesson you expect everybody to get an R1, so that's evidence of high expectations. Manage class effectively using using approaches which are appropriate to pupils' needs. So this will be on your lesson observation, maintain good relationships with pupils. Again, that should mostly be on your observation. So I'll show you some examples. So from my lesson observation, I've got for standard 7, outstanding. So the teacher said, very consistent application of your behaviour expectations means that this class is now reacting very positively and working well. You are very engaging and have a good presence in the room. The students were very quiet and all on task for the independent dictionary work. Good insistence on putting things down to listen to you. So that's a good example. And then I've also highlighted that by referencing standard 7, B, C and D, and just gone into detail about it. Another example of standard 7 is in my evaluation of teaching of one of my lessons. So I've referenced standard 7B and 7D. I've said I sustain high expectations of behaviour which are integral to learning. I have established and maintained a very effective framework for discipline, consistently and fairly using a wide range of strategies. I have strong relationships with pupils to ensure a productive and inspiring learning environment. I ensure that any matters relating to pupil behaviour are addressed immediately to maximise learning. So specifically, other ways how you could reference standard 7D. The bit where it says about strong relationships, you could get pupil feedback and use that as evidence, which I have at the back here. So I've got my student feedback there, and then also any issues relating to pupils' behaviour are addressed immediately. So you could either make a note of when you have, for example, written on somebody's behaviour report, or actually take a picture of someone's behaviour report and use that as evidence. Last but not least, standard 8, fulfil wider professional responsibilities. A lot of people struggle to evidence this, so I'll take you through this step by step. So standard 8A, to be proactive and make a significant contribution to the wider life and ethos of their school, has a clear understanding of teachers' legal responsibilities. So you can evidence this by any emails, or just like screenshot your email account that you have, because that shows that you, if you're sending emails to other staff, then it shows you're proactive and make a significant contribution to the wider life. Also, just get your mentor or somebody to sign things that you do, like as evidence of things that you do around the school. For example, break time duties, lunchtime duty, form time assemblies, anything else that you do in terms of that. Standard 8B. So effectively consults with different colleagues as appropriate, knowing when to draw on their help and advice. So you can use screenshots of emails that you've used to consult with colleagues, and when you've reflected on the lesson observations and feedback that they've given you. Standard 8C, deploy support staff effectively. So if you've actually got any staff in your classroom, how you've used them like a teaching assistant, write that in your lesson plan and evaluation of the professional relationships with support staff, and to demonstrate collaborative working and deployment of support staff to maximise the learning of all pupils. So write that in your lesson plan and evaluation. Standard 8D, take responsibility for improving teaching through appropriate professional development, responding to advice and feedback from colleagues. So write down any feedback that you've got from teachers, maybe make a note of how you'll take that on board and use it in the future to improve. Also, if you've attended any training days, keep that as evidence. Proactive with their own learning and professional development in order to improve teaching. So just reflecting on your own lessons, so lesson evaluations, that's great evidence. Open to coaching and mentoring, so use your notes from your weekly mentor meetings, that's great evidence. And the last one, standard 8D, communicate effectively with parents with regard to pupils' achievement and well-being. So parents' evening is the main thing, but also if you send notes home in students' planners, that's great evidence. And if there's any phone calls home or anything like that is great, or open days, they're great as well. Yes. Now, I did say at the beginning that I have more than one folder. This is just important documents. For example, MFL lesson starters. This is just documents that we were given at university. Lesson planning checklist. I just kept them in a folder just in case. Classroom use of target language, just things like that. And then in this folder, So this is my professional journey file. So in here I have, so this is from my first placement actually. This is most of my evidence from first placement. So as you can see, this is right at the beginning. I was at beginning. So this is the same as the other one, but after first placement. So, you know, I was beginning. So again, I have my lesson observations. You can see that I'm developing. I'm developing, beginning. Oh, this is good evidence for standard 8. This is from a school trip, so that's contributing to wider professional life because I went on a school trip. As you can see, 8A, proactive about making a positive contribution to the life and ethos of the school. And I've just dated it here and I've said school trip to museums in Manchester with year 11, 12 and 13 pupils. Here I have referenced standard 5A, C and D by differentiating and providing a student with this plan during the assessment. I also helped to decorate the classroom with Christmas things, which again contributes to standard 8 wider professional life. So this is another example of when I've got students to give feedback. I just said I asked students for anonymous feedback regarding the lessons at the end of our last lesson, and this references standard 2C. Encourage students to reflect on how best they felt they learned during lessons, and 4D, reflect on the effectiveness of the lessons and approaches to teaching. And I've done that on that page too. I've also taken pictures of when I've marked students' books. So I've just written here, marking books. Here I have marked work adhering to the school's marking policy. So they said E1, I can't even remember it now, but that was to do with their policy. I've highlighted where I've written comments about specific details on students' work and positive feedback and points for improvement. And then I've just, highlighted which standards this addresses. So I've said 2C, provide frequent, consistent and clear feedback, which allows pupils to recognise and explain what they need to do next. And oh my God, I didn't even write down what standard that was, but allows time for students to reflect on feedback. So at the start of next lesson, just give them time to reflect on it. Positive comments and feedback. Yeah, so then I've got quite a few pages of where I've marked students' books, and then because I've evidenced this during first placement, I didn't need to evidence it again during second placement because obviously I was already doing it. But yeah, like I said, this second folder is basically just evidence from my first placement. And lastly, I've also got a fourth folder, not really sure what's in here. It says section 4, teaching school-based learning file. So this is just everything else. I've got my weekly reviews of progress, lesson evaluations and plans. As you can see, this is empty. This is again from my first placement. And it turns out that this is all just lesson plans and evaluations from first placement.
I really hope that this video was helpful. I hope that maybe you could use this to arrange and compile your own evidence folder. I hope it's given you a bit more of an understanding about the concept of it all and how to put it together. At my university, they didn't tell us an exact way to put it together, which is why they just said that we could do whatever we wanted, which is why I did it this way. And it wasn't until the last day that my professional mentor actually told me that she wanted me to set it out differently, but she hadn't mentioned it at all throughout the entire year. So it just meant that it took a while, like going through each standard, because I didn't realise she was going to go through each standard in order. I thought she would just look through my folder and get an overall gist. So I would definitely recommend talking to the person who's going to be evaluating your folder at the end of the year and ask them how they want you to set it out. But saying that, if you've got the evidence there, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how long it's going to take you to go through it. It's whatever works best for you. As long as you've got the evidence there, that's the main thing. Like, for example, mine wasn't set out exactly how she wanted it, but I still got outstanding because I had all of the evidence there. So I hope this video has helped you, and if it did, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to. If you would like to see any more of my Vlogtober uploads, which are much more light-hearted and fun, then they're in the description bar below. And thank you again for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.